We just came through eclipse season, and what a perfect time to learn more about the moon. And you can't get a better resource than Stephen Forrest's Book of the Moon, available on audiobook narrated by me. A direct link is available on the homepage of hightimelinebooks.com, or you can go to Audible or Apple Books. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller along with Robert Glasscock, and one of your excellent questions.
Hello, longtime fan of your podcast. Here is my question. In equal houses, my cusps are 23 degrees, which means most of my house is in a different sign than the house ruler. For example, my first house cusp is in Scorpio, but I have Neptune conjunct Mercury in the first house at 4 degrees Sagittarius. Since so much emphasis is placed on the ruler of the houses, how do we read planets in split houses? Thanks so much.
This is such a great question, and it's one that's common for most people. In her case, she has 23 degrees on every house cusp. And I think of the house cusps, including the ascendant, as sort of the front door to those house matters. It's definitely the sign and the planet that rules that sign, which rules those house matters. But the bulk of her let's see, she's got 23 degrees. So 7 degrees more, and the bulk of every house is in the next sign. Nonetheless, her approach to the house matters ruled by every house in her chart, her approach to it on the surface and most immediately will be through the sign on the cusp and, of course, the planet or planets that rule that sign. And yet, the bulk of every house is ruled by the following sign. And this adds a certain kind of complexity to a chart, and it's true for a lot of charts. So if you're taking money, let's say, or income, which is ruled by the second house, which rules her self-worth, the sign on that cusp will describe how she earns money, how she spends money, and even deeper than that, it describes her beliefs about her own self-worth. And the ruler of the sign on her second cusp will be in another house, probably, which will also give further clues as to her self-worth identity and also how she makes money.
That's Sagittarius in her chart, obviously, because she's Scorpio rising. So then 23, it goes to Sag.
So then her self-worth is Sagittarian on the surface. And it is ruled by Jupiter, which tends to indicate a lot of confidence and a lot of faith in her own ability to earn a living. It's a mutable sign. So she may, over a lifetime, earn a living in a variety of ways or a variety of jobs. But just beneath the surface of her self-worth is Capricorn. So it turns out, and that's a wonderful combination because it's got the vision and the confidence of Sagittarius and the farsightedness and the big ideas of Sagittarius. And right behind that is Capricorn, which shows in a more subtle, hidden way her capacity for discipline, hard work, prioritization, organization, ambition, even leadership. So it's an excellent combination on her second house. So if she's got Sag on the second, she's got Scorpio rising, right?
Correct.
All right, so she's got a double ruler, Mars and Pluto. The bulk of her first house is Sagittarian. The Scorpio ascendant, depending on where Mars and Pluto are, will show her external persona, the face that she presents to the world. But just behind that is a lot of Sagittarian in her first house. So if it requires you to think as an astrologer and do a bit of analysis here to ponder, what does this mean when on the surface of every house is one sign, but just beneath that surface, the bulk of that house, those house matters, are ruled by the next sign. So it adds a lot of depth to her as a person, and also a lot of valuable information if she takes the time to think about the meanings of those signs. So her first house, she's ruled by Scorpio. Her life is ruled by Scorpio. But it's also the first house, the bulk of the first house is ruled by Sagittarius. Nonetheless, her chart ruler, for example, if she's looking at solar arcs, she's going to want to pay particular attention to solar arc Mars and solar arc Pluto. But she's also got that Sagittarius in the bulk of her first house, which is a tremendous booster for the challenges that inevitably come along with Scorpio rising, which can be very challenging and sometimes even devastating. But because the bulk of her first house is Sagittarius, she absolutely rises above any devastating challenges that she faces because she's got that Sagittarian faith in, like Scarlett O'Hara, tomorrow is another day. And she's always thinking ahead of the present. So she is a visionary by nature, depending on where her Jupiter is, by sign and by house. So that's a way to approach it, I think, Thomas, if that helps.
You know, the other thing I love is that she's using the equal house system, giving it a shot, right?
Yes.
And it makes you realize, too, when you think about this, that this same question applies to Placidus and Koch and Regimentanus and all the others that are time-based. So this is not just an equal house question. It shows up for a lot of people. And then, of course, and we've talked about it in previous episodes, with Placidus, you have the possibility of intercepted signs as well, where there's a sign within two signs on either side, all in the same house. So it can get quite complicated from there.
Yes, but very good point that her question applies to all house systems, equal, Placidus, anything else.
Really, except whole sign, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Except old signs.
Okay, so she's 23 degrees. I'm 28, so I could relate to this question.
Very much.
Yeah, and you can apply decanates to this as well.
Oh, yeah, always. And the dwads.
And the dwads. So those are two more slices of planetary influences over that ascendant point. And one of the brilliant things about the equal house system, talk for a minute, because the ascendant is such a critical point in our chart. And what the equal house system does is put that degree and minute point at the beginning of every house. And to me, it extends it across all these areas of our life. It's brilliant when you think about it.
Yes, it is. I mean, I don't want to take the time to go into why all these other house systems were devised. In a nutshell, back in the early days, and as astrology progressed, and certainly by the time we get into medieval times, astrologers were always, it was a very fatalistic approach to astrology, unlike today, where today we are far more advanced in terms of our awareness of free will and how, in fact, we create our own reality from minute to minute, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, according to our own belief systems. And lives in those days were very prescribed. People didn't live a long time. They had pandemics. They didn't have the medical care that we have today that extends lives. They didn't get to travel to the extent that we do today. So their lives were fatalistic. And these various house systems were each one of them were derived in the attempt to make ever more accurate, specific predictions. That was the whole motive behind them. But in fact, philosophically and realistically, if you're in Alaska, a high northern latitude, maybe in the ancient days you used whale blubber for money, but it was still money, a second house matter. So it doesn't matter. All the old books try to justify these different house systems. Oh, life is so different for the Eskimos or for people live in the very southern tip of South America. No, they're not. Lives aren't different. They have different means and different modalities, but money is still money. It's a symbolic exchange of values, no matter where you live. So the equal distribution not only made more sense to me, but in terms of physical facts, starting with the very first book that I read, according to equal houses, I have a scar on the left side of my head or face. In Placidus, that would have been an intercepted moon in Aries in my second house, which would have put the scar on the right side. But in fact, this scar, which you can't see, but it's there from age 5, a little hairline scar, is on my left cheek. And using astrology to predict the sexes of children works a better percentage of the time using equal houses than any other method. So I had to go along with it. I'm a very skeptical guy. I have a lot of Virgo, but I'm also experimentative. I'll try anything. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, I'll put it aside. But for me, in my experience, equal houses absolutely works the most reliably of any method I've ever tried.
Linda Goodman used it, and you traveled and worked with her for about 4 or 5 years. What did she say about it? What were some of her words about it?
Same thing. And she learned it from her teacher, Lloyd Cope, in New York.
Because she has a later degree ascendant, 23 in her case, 28 in mine. How does that affect the structure of our life, if you will, because we have, and I guess it's kind of interesting because we could talk about early degrees, mid degrees, and later degrees, but maybe we'll just stay with later degrees because that's the question she asked. How does that affect things as the chart unfolds, especially in progressions?
Well, a really good point, Thomas, because she has 23 degrees of Scorpio rising. So that 7 degrees later and 1 degree equals a year. So at age 7, or possibly 8, but right in there, her life changed. Every house cusp in that chart that she has advanced into the next sign. She has 23 Scorpio rising. At age 7, her solar arc ascendant went to 0 and 1 degree Sagittarius, and her life changed. They may have moved. They may have relocated. Her father may have changed jobs. I mean, you can go on and look to see where Jupiter was, for example, to get a better idea of what the change was. But around age 7, everything changed for her. She still, all of her life, will have Scorpio rising as a starting place. That's her base chart. That's her birth horoscope. But those things evolve over time. And so do people. And if you're studying astrology consciously, you can take advantage of that knowledge by becoming consciously aware of how your ascendant has changed since you were born, and how every other house cusp has changed since you were born. So it gives you a very reliable antenna on how to evolve yourself consciously. If you don't know astrology, you're still evolving. These things still change signs, but it's all unconscious. So you're not as aware of it as when you do study astrology, and therefore you don't have the same power to draw on that kind of knowledge that you get by studying your horoscope.
I think anybody who has analyzed their life knows that we are blended creatures, aren't we? We're not just cut and dried. And that is reflected very well in this system. Thanks, Robert, and thank you to our listener and caller. If you'd like to leave us a message with your own voice, you don't have to leave us your email to even do this. You can just do it anonymously. Go to the top of funastrology.com, upper left, orange button, and that's how you do it. We'll see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thanks for listening.